fool me, we can't get fooled again.
Hounds of heaven. Welcome back in. David O'Gray off code and Unscripted. Jesus loves you and is there for you. Got a really late live stream tonight. But this is about the time I can fit it in. Had to do one this week. I try to do at least one every week. All right. So this is really the best time to do it. As you guys know, got a lot going on with the move to Germany and selling a house, selling everything, packing everything. It's just a lot of moving pieces. So we're still not that close to moving. We still have some technical things to work out. We are doing it. But yeah, welcome in to the live stream. Off code and Unscripted. He loves you. There for you. So live stream tonight is going to be, is a bit frustrating, right? That for the past decade, I've been working, very hard on really just trying to educate Catholics about the Catholic teaching on Freemasonry. And welcome everyone in. Hey, Brianna. Hope you're back home. I know you're gone a while. Got traditional girl here, Afro 5 here. But yeah, but working very hard to educate Catholics about what does the Catholic Church teach about Freemasonry? Because even when I was a Freemason for that decade, just very involved with Freemasonry, it was frustrating for me back then, right? As a person who's pretty much a deist and a Gnostic sometimes, hearing just like some of the really strange things that Christians said about Freemasonry, right? Like, where did you get that from? That's not even true. I was open to Freemasonry being critiqued. I didn't have any stakes in it. I wasn't religious or anything like that. I wasn't a Christian, so it didn't affect me anyway. Didn't have a dog in a fight, but it's just frustrating. Like, where did you get that from? That's not even true. So then, I become a Catholic, and now I'm on that side of the fence, right? And I'm hearing like some Catholics say things about Freemasonry that are just like odd. And people ask me, they've always asked me over the years, like, well, David, why do you think there's so many Catholics who are Freemasons? And I have to tell you, the reason why there's so many Catholics who are Freemasons is because of Catholics. It's because of Catholics. Because Catholics don't give a good reason for Freemasons, Catholic Freemasons, to leave the Masonic lodge. They just don't. Because we don't stick to the script. We don't sell the truth. We don't tell the truth. Right? And it's sort of like in sales, right? I think some of the best salespeople, I've been in sales for, most of my life. And the best salespeople, and I've been one of the best salespeople, is that we say the same thing over and over and over again. We stick to the script. And it's like playing chess. You make the same moves over and over and over again. You know the game. But we don't do that as Catholics when it comes to evangelizing what the Catholic Church teaches about Freemasonry. We just go way off script. And we lose an opportunity to bring someone out of Freemasonry. So the best example, so like I said, I've been working on this for a decade, right? I didn't even really plan to even get into this, right? When I became a Catholic, I planned to leave Freemasonry behind me. I did. Didn't want to really revisit that part of my life. But, again, I got into Catholicism and, I read John Salz's books, and I thought they were, sufficient. He really didn't have a lot of experience with Freemasonry. He's kind of a local guy, really didn't have a lot of global experience. But, I thought what he wrote was sufficient, right? So I said, I'm not going to really write a book. So I did some articles, started speaking about Freemasonry. But the longer it went on, the more I kept hearing like these really strange things. So that's when I decided to write my book, The Catholic Catechism on Freemasonry. That's the definitive book on Freemasonry. Then I put out my class, 16 lecture course class on the same subject on my website and on Udemy. And it's really frustrating, like I said from the beginning, is because you like ever work so hard on something and then you see like, man, your work has like had no impact whatsoever. And you may experience this, something, whatever you're doing in your life. Heck, it may be with your kids, right? You try to raise them well, no impact, right? They went off course, whatever. We all experience those things, and it is frustrating. So I was watching this video that I'm about to show you by Father Chris Alar. He is, I think they call themselves, it's the religious orders Marians of Divine Mercy, I believe they call themselves. So I saw this video, because on YouTube, because I watch so many videos about this subject, I get anytime something pops up about Freemasonry, it comes up, I watch it, see what's going on. So I'm starting watching this video by Father Chris Alar, and it's frustrating, like the things he's saying about Freemasonry that aren't even true. And he's just repeating myths. He's repeating myths that's been around for over 200, 300 years. And just misleading Catholics and taking them off script. I think there's a convincing way to convince Catholics who are Freemasons to leave Freemasonry. And it's exactly what the popes have said for the past, since 1738. Just the five things the popes have said about why you cannot be a Freemason. But I'm watching this video, he's getting caught up in all these things and half-truths and it's just so frustrating. So I posted a comment on the video. I don't have it there. I deleted it now. But I posted a comment on the video saying, I gave some timestamps about, hey, this part is wrong. He doesn't have references here, this and that. And, whoever runs the comment section over there responded back to me. I thought it was kind of like weird. And so I responded back and said, well, here's some more things. And then they responded back like, who are you? And I was like, okay, all right, I'm going to just give a full rebuttal to video. So here we go. So it is, I chopped the video up a little bit. So if you want to go watch the whole video, you can go over to their website, watch the whole thing. But I'm going to play some clips what Father Chris Alar is saying, and then I'll respond to it. And what I'm doing here is really just a teaching tool to help Catholics understand what does a Catholic Church teach about Freemasonry and what not ever to say about Freemasonry to a Freemason, or you're going to lose your opportunity to evangelize them. So let's get it cracking. Let me bring this into the stream and let's get it going here. Let me remove some dead space here so we can focus on just the video. Let me stream my Patreons real quick. Got some new Patreons. I appreciate you guys who support me on Patreon. And again, if you have joined me on Patreon, please take the course on Freemasonry. And also, if you're a member of Patreon, I think at $10 level, you get a free book, right? You get this free book, get a Kindle version, or if you pay for the whole year like some people have. I think I got to send out some Kindle copies pretty soon, because a lot of people have been paying for the whole year in advance at the lower level. So yeah, that's that. So yeah, thanks for that. Always give you guys a shout out. Appreciate everything you do. And when I moved to Germany, I can't wait to get a studio set up. I got a whole new camera. It's like this HD camera. It's like really crisp and clear. It doesn't work in this studio here, but thanks to your support, we got some new equipment coming online and you'll see it soon. All right, so let's get this going.
Well, thank you everybody for joining us here live at the National Shrine of the Divine Mercy. I'm Father Chris Alar, one of the Marian priests, and it's great to have you with us for something that's much overdue. I've been working a long time on putting this talk together, talking with people, with theologians, with church officials, with former Freemasons. And we're bringing you today an important and critically important topic on Freemasonry and what the church actually teaches and why. And so we're very grateful as I take you back to seminary. We didn't talk enough about this in seminary. We did some. I'm going to share that with you.
All right, so that was the introduction for Father Chris Alar, and just really simple introduction to what he's studying up here. Interesting to note here, and I'm going to point out some of the things. This isn't just like a slam against Father Chris. I think he was his intentions were well-meaning. I don't think he intends to cause harm. I don't. He's probably like a really nice guy. I think I would probably like him in person. But again, this video is just a teaching tool to help Catholics what to say, what not to say. Okay, and I think he gives us a lot of things what not to say, and I'll go over those things. And he gives us some things to say, and I'll go over those things. But so he starts off the video with the introduction saying that, he's talked to some theologians, he's talked to some former Masons, he's done a lot of research on this and that. I never heard from Father Chris Alar. Doesn't seem like he read the definitive book on the subject, the Catholic Catechism on Freemasonry, obviously. But I think that's part of the deficiency in the work he's about to present. He's about to present a whole lot of hearsay about Freemasonry. And he's going to front load the hearsay, and he's going to back load what the church actually teaches. And so a Freemason watching this video from Father Chris, their interest is piqued. Maybe they're a Catholic and a Freemason. Maybe they've heard some things, so they're watching this video like, oh, okay, this guy maybe done his research, and then this happens.
All right, you saw on your screen Freemasonry, the truth of the lodge. Now, we put this talk under the intercession of the Mantle of Mary and St. Maximilian Kolbe, as I said, who formed the Militia Immaculata to protect against Freemasonry. Now, I'm going to start right with a heavy punch, because this is what nobody in our Catholic faith realizes, and I mean nobody. Maybe a few theologians. But I want to start right off the bat with the fact that Freemasonry has been involved in many revolutions and is still a huge danger today.
All right, so this is the problem that I think a lot of Protestants and Catholics make on the subject of trying to lead Catholics out of Freemasonry or trying to explain the Catholic prohibition of Freemasonry. They immediately jump into the sexy. They immediately jump into the revolutions. And so what he's presenting here is like a very flawed thesis from the beginning. The revolutions and all that is not why a Catholic cannot be a Freemason. The truth of the matter, as I say in my book, yes, Catholics were involved in the French revolutions, the revolutions of 1848 throughout Europe, the American Revolution, all the Civil War, the sexual revolution, all the revolutions, you name it. Yes, Freemasons were involved on both sides. On both sides. In every revolution, Freemasons fought against each other. He'll talk about this later. He'll sort of contradict himself later when he says Freemasons don't even agree on what type of world governance there should be. The Freemasons never have, right? So Freemasons have fought on both sides of every revolution. Sure, when it comes to like the French Revolution, American Revolution, we like to point out the winners, like, oh, these guys won and they were Freemasons. What about the guys who lost? Benedict Arnold, Freemason. So you have these people who lost who were also Freemasons. So when you're speaking to a Freemason who is also a Catholic, or he's maybe not be a Catholic, and you're trying to educate them about why you should not be a Catholic or a Freemason or a Protestant and a Freemason, this is not where you begin. This is not where you front load your argument. that, oh, well, and say, well, you can't be a Freemason because Freemasons were involved in revolutions. Well, Catholics were involved in revolutions as well. Should I not be a Catholic because Catholics were involved in revolutions? Do we think all the people involved in these revolutions were all non-Catholics? No. So, yes, people did things, and but that's not a reason why we avoid things because bad people did bad things. No, that's a silly argument. But the bigger point to make here is that this is not what the church teaches. This is not what Clement the 12th taught, Leo the 13th taught, Pius the 9th taught, any popes who spoke about Freemasonry explicitly. This is not one of the reasons they said that you cannot be a Freemason. It had nothing whatsoever to do with the revolutions.
What you don't know, and I didn't even know till I was into my priesthood, are the incredibly important years of 1517, 1717, 1917. This is Satan's plan to destroy mankind.
All right. So numerology. Okay. This is a big thing. And sure, I do bring it up in my book. I do also make that same point. It's an interesting point that Protestantism comes along in 1517. Freemasonry comes along 2 years later in 1717. The Bolsheviks from Russia, the Communists come along in 1917. It's a great point about numerology. Numerology it's not something that we would call truth or fact. It just is. It's coincidence, maybe. Maybe there's a pattern there. Maybe. Right? Or it could be just coincidence. We don't know for sure. Numerology isn't something that we base our faith on necessarily. There has to be a lot more there. Okay. But it's an interesting point. It all falls apart, though, the deeper you get into studying the history of Freemasonry. There's quite a bit of dispute among Masonic scholars about the year 1717. So, again, this is why you don't go into the conversation with Freemasons, even with this point. Oh, you cannot be a Freemason because Freemason was involved in plots of Satan against Christ and his church. It happened in 1517 with the Protestants, in 1717 and 1917. And again, you immediately lose the Freemason in that conversation. Anyone who has been rigorous about Masonic studies, of course, not a whole lot, but you never know. And so they know that the year 1717 is in dispute. It could have been 1716 when the Grand Lodge was formed. Okay. So you immediately lose them. And Father Chris is really going to keep doing this. You'll see that the Freemason, what they're doing, they're hearing these things. Okay. And every time we say something that's off the mark, there's distance that grows between us and a Freemason. Right. At first we have their ear, and then we say something that's kind of off. And then something else is kind of off. And then the more weird things we say, the more opportunity that we have to lose them because we lose their trust, right? And this is why it's so important just to stick with what the Catholic Church teaches about why Catholics cannot be Freemasons. But yeah, the whole numerology thing is interesting.
All right, so let's look at our slide. Our first slide, here's a picture. Guess what date? Unbelievable. June 24th, 1717. The Grand Lodge of London was founded to officially unify Freemasonry. It was the official beginning of Freemasonry. Notice the date, June 24th. On that day, they expressed their covert goal to destroy the Catholic Church.
All right. So, one thing I just want to respond here real quick. And you can hear in my class on this subject, I talk a lot about this and make a big point about this. because I talk a lot about in my class. I talk a lot about in my book a little bit as well. I talk about how the guild system of craft masonry subsists in Freemasonry today. Important thing to note about the guild system that had been in existence for 1,000 years, maybe before the Grand Lodge system came online. The Freemasons or the craft Masons were very Catholic until they were very Anglican, until they were very various types of Protestants. So the Feast of St. John the Baptist, Freemasons in the guilds, in the lodges have celebrated since around 700 AD and beyond. You can see this in some of the early documents called, one of them is Regis Manuscripts. It's a very old ancient charge of the Freemasons. So the Feast of John the Baptist and John the Evangelist, Freemasons have always celebrated on the summer and winter solstice, respectively. So, and again, that's a point that some Masonic scholars would make, that really wasn't a date that the Grand Lodge was founded. That was more like a ceremonial date of their founding, or it could have been that date, and they're really, the reason why they were gathered was because they were celebrating the Feast of St. John the Baptist. So in the guild lodge system, all craft lodges, because they were very Catholic, they all had their own priest, they had their own chaplain, they had their own sanctuary, and they celebrated the feast days of the church. The guilds oftentimes had their own patron saints. So this isn't anything really nefarious that it happened on a day that, Father Chris Alar wants to kind of point out. This is just tradition that stretches all the way back to a time when the Freemasons or the craft guilds were very Catholic and they were celebrating feast. The next thing he points out was, he says that was this day they established their covert grand scheme or grand plan to do all these machinations. Not true at all. What was going on, and I talk about this in my class in length, but I'll just talk about it briefly here, was that, as I said, the guilds used to be very Catholic before they were very Anglican. Before, then, at when King Henry VIII, he brings on the Church of England, all the guilds, there starts to be some sort of tension in the craft guilds, whether they are the guild of the metalworkers, the guilds of the embroiderers, the guilds of the masons, all the guilds, there started to be these disputes, religious disputes in the guilds. And then as the Protestant reformulation continues, and now in England and throughout Europe, you have various different types of Protestants. This becomes a big problem in all of the craft guilds, all of them. It starts to be these religious disputes. And so the Freemasons come up, which was the most powerful guild. The stonemasons had the most powerful guilds because they had all the money, because they did the major work. Okay. So if you're an embroiderer or you're a metal worker guild or whatever guild you belong to, a woodworker, you wanted to affiliate with the Freemasons, because if you got in with them, you can get some work, right? If they're building a castle or a building and you're a woodworker, you want to get in with the Freemasons, the stonemasons, because that's, it was a network, right? And so what happened was, once all these different religious sects, Protestant sects, start coming on throughout Europe, it becomes really messy, really ugly in the guilds, because there's disputes, there's fights. And at London in the 1700s and the late 1600s in England, you had, I think there are perhaps over, 17 stonemason guilds, 17. And that wasn't because there was that much work. It's because of religious disputes. Catholics weren't associating, Catholic Masons were not associating with Anglicans. Anglicans weren't associating with Puritans. And so you had all these different guilds separated because of religion. Even in some of the guilds, you couldn't move up and become a deacon or officer if you belonged to the wrong religion. So what happened in 1717, it wasn't some sort of grand scheme to take over the world or, kill the Pope. The philosophy will come later. But what was immediately going on was just something very practical. These guys were concerned about money. This was about status. This is about prestige. This is about wealth. So their grand plan, which turned into a philosophy, was just indifferentism. They was like, look, guys, we don't have to be concerned about religion. We could suppress that and really focus on getting this money. And so they came up with this idea to push religion down and focus on a brotherhood, right? Later on, pretty soon, just a few years later, about 6 years later after that, the philosophy was sort of developed and they would start calling themselves a universal religion. But the first just practical reason, it was just all about the money. It was capitalism at work. And it was a really dumb idea to figure out how to take religion out of making money. So, but that's what's going on. And in this type of stuff, and I'm not really sharing anything with you. Yeah, I have a whole class on this, but this isn't anything like you can't find just by doing just a little bit of research and buying just a few good books. No, you're not going to find stuff like this necessarily on Google, Wikipedia. Yeah, you have to do like just old school research, get into some old books, get into some old history, find out what's going on. And again, if you take my course, you'll see all the references to everything that I'm talking about as well. So that's the response to that.
This is not a secret. This is their goal, to destroy the Catholic Church and religion so that secularism can reign. Now, ironically, wasn't it June 24th that Roe v. Wade was just overturned? The feast of John the Baptist, the birth of John the Baptist, who what? Proclaimed the truth. He's the number one saint in proclamation of the truth. Him and St. Joseph and Mother Mary. On that same day Roe v. Wade was overturned, June 24th, was the Feast of the Sacred Heart. Don't think God isn't doing something here. All right. So you've got this 1517, an attack on Catholicism. 1717, an attack on all of Christianity. Then 1917, with the Bolshevik Revolution, attack on God himself through atheism. Now, the mission was to gather the principles of the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment was actually the Dark Ages. The Dark Ages were actually the Enlightenment. What they call the Dark Ages, scholasticism, Thomas Aquinas, that was true Enlightenment. What we call the Enlightenment is really the Dark Ages. Man is God. Reason reigns supreme. So they put the mission, to take the principles of the Enlightenment into a single, powerful, secret society to implement it, to carry it out. What, Father? To carry what out? The Enlightenment ideals. The ideals that man is God, not God. It's an overthrow. It's Satan's attempt to overthrow.
Just don't know where he got that from, right? I think we need a reference. I've never heard of anything like that whatsoever. He definitely needs to cite a source of what he's reading out of. So it seems kind of odd. Okay, but the whole mythical origin story. The funny thing about what Father Chris Alar is saying about this enlightenment coming into Freemasonry is the same thing that some Freemasons would say. And this is what I call the mythical origin story. It's romantic and it cannot be verified. And I talk about this in my class. So the Freemasons who proposed the mythical origin story, right? There's a few mythical origin stories. I think Father Chris Alar mentions one momentarily. He's talking about the Freemasonry goes back to the King Solomon's Temple, right? Some Freemasons will even go back further. They'll go back to the pyramids. So those were the first Masons, right? And this secret knowledge that's always been transmitted. Also part of the mythical origin story is this idea that people like Sir Isaac Newton and all the free thinkers, so to speak, of that age, were Freemasons, and they were suppressed by the Catholic Church, and some of them were killed. And so they had to find a safe place. So they decided to come together and create this new Freemasonry, right? They came into the guilds, right? And they took them up. Stop. It cannot be documented. No one's been able to prove it. Historians, some of the best historians I've ever encountered in my life were Freemasons. These guys, Masonic historians, many of whom I've known, obviously, because I was a fellow in the Masonic Research Society, just rigorous scholarship about this subject. And they would love to say Sir Isaac Newton was one of their founders, but it can't be proven. It's not documented. It's myth. It's fantasy. So what we know about Freemasonry is the guild system of the stonemasons. It subsists in Freemasonry today. In the late 1600s and early 1700s, they began allowing members into their order who were not stonemasons. Some of them were artists or carpenters or doing some other trades. Some of them were not. They were just aristocrats. They were just gentlemen who came to join the association. There used to be some disputes about giving these speculative masons or these non-operative masons offices. So there used to be disputes about that. So this was not some sort of friendly, hostile, or whatever takeover. This is just, again, the guild system was about status, position, and wealth. Okay, it's about association. And so there were some practical reasons why some aristocrats were led into the guild system. So the mythical origin story, and Father Chris's, his whole thing about why they founded it, he just needs a reference for that, and it has to be credible. And I think Masonic scholars would be very interested if it was actually from a source that was actually associated with the founding.
Now, they started to bear rotten fruit. 1730, Masonry comes to the United States. 1789, the anti-Catholic revolution, the French Revolution. I was just in France. Horrible. 4% of Catholics practicing their faith. All right, so these were the first bad fruits of many Masonic revolutions. The French Revolution, the Irish Rising of 1798, South American revolts against Spain, as well as the unification of Italy, leading the French Third Republic that confiscated church property in France. All this. I won't get into that detail.
All right. So he just continues his flawed theses, right? He's still well into this presentation, and he really hasn't given one reason for a Catholic not to be a Freemason. He hasn't said anything that the popes have said. He just really stuck on the sexy, the myths, the rumors. It's just really weird. And again, this point about the revolutions, again, every revolution he named, and I can name several others, Freemasons fought on both sides. They fought against each other. Catholics were on both sides. Catholics fought against each other. So there's really no way that we can call any revolution a Masonic revolution. To be sure, we can point to the revolutions of, say, 1848 and the French Revolution and say that the ideas proposed by the revolutionaries sounded very familiar to some key Masonic principles, right? That's the most we can say. And yeah, sure, we can point out the winners of these wars and say that, yeah, a lot of them were Freemasons. But again, so were a lot of the losers.
Let's look at our next slide. The most notable Bolsheviks, Vladimir Lenin and Leo Trotsky. Now, history differs on whether or not they were actually Masons. Some say no, they were anti-Masons. But one thing is for sure, they used Masonry to achieve their agenda, their political agenda.
So quick point about communism and about this weird thing when we treat Freemasonry as if it's an ideology. So communism has never been friends with Freemasonry. There's one instance I'll talk about. So when communists come on, you look in places like Italy, and Pius Leo XIII had wrote about this in a couple of his encyclicals, his last two encyclicals on the subject. The very last document he wrote about Freemasonry was actually Apostolic Exhortation, but the two before that, he spoke about this, what was going on in Italy. So, I'm sorry, Pius IX. I think I said Leo XIII, Pius IX. And so, and that's a really good example. Italy in the late 1800s, it was moving towards socialism, and eventually it's going to start adopting communism. And so what was going on is very interesting, was that as the communists or the socialists and then the communists were starting to gain power in Italy, by 1910, they had kicked out all of the Freemasons out of the Communist Party. And I think by 1917, if I want to say the year right, they had outright banned them. So communists and Freemasons had never been friends. Never been friends. They were quite hostile to one another. They have competing ideologies. Okay. I get more into that about my class. I won't go into it here about, why their ideologies are competing. But then I'll go to my second point. Okay, where have Freemasons and Catholics ever got along? Only place they've ever got along, only place they've been friends in a sense is Cuba. Cuba really is the only place. And I think that's the only place that they've gotten along well, is because they both, the friend of your friend, the enemy of your friend is your friend. Is that how to go? How's that saying goes? The enemy of your enemy is your friend. Right. So they've got along because, the mutual enemy was a Catholic church. So Cuba is the only exception. Other than that, communists don't like Freemasons. Muslims don't like Freemasons. All right. So Freemasonry as an ideology, this is something that you hear a lot, right? Or something I hear a lot. People will say, oh, well, Francis is a Freemason, or this person is a Freemason. And what they're talking about is Freemasonry is an organization. It's something that you're initiated into. It's not an ideology. And so we can't rightly say that someone is a Freemason unless we have evidence or whatever they've been initiated into Freemasonry. So it's not an ideology. So we don't just say like Father Chris said, oh, they're embracing the principles of Freemasonry, the communists. No, that's Freemasonry isn't an ideology. It's an organization. The ideology of Freemasonry, we could say indifferentism. That's what Pope Clement XII said. Or we could say naturalism. That's what Pope Leo XIII said. All right. So those are some of the key ideologies of Freemasonry. So we don't use Freemasonry as an ideology. All right.
So the first strike, again, I can't emphasize this enough. The first strike against the Catholic Church was Protestantism, 1517. The culminating atheistic blow came 1917 by the Bolsheviks in atheism. But this jump from the Protestant Reformation to outright atheism could not have happened without Freemasonry in the middle.
I think he makes a really good point there. I like the point that Sean Ellerton made too. Freemasonry does not survive in those nation states where tyranny rules, and that's why Sean could really say the opposite, which would be a fact as well, that Freemasonry thrives in Protestant countries where relativism, secularism, and indifferentism are the rule of the day. But so, and I talk about this in my essay that I wrote over. I've been writing a number of essays over at 1 Peter 5 about Freemasonry, trying to help push this thing along. And I'll paste it here in the comment box on the live, and I have it down in the comment box on the stream, and the description box as well. So the major contribution of Freemasonry, in Leo XIII, he talks about this in one of his later encyclicals, was the insertion, Pius IX primarily. The major contribution of Freemasonry was this idea of separation of church and state. Separation of church and states is really the major contribution of Freemasonry. I keep getting Leo in 13th and Pius confused in my head, but I'll get it straight from going forward. But so that's the major contribution. That's the lasting contribution of Freemasonry to the whole world. Freemasonry came along in a time in the world where monarchs ruled, kings ruled, queens ruled, right? Princes and potentates ruled. And so Freemasonry very initially, and I talk a lot, again, I keep saying this, I talk about this in my class, so I have to say that so I don't go too deep into the woods here, because there I go deep into the woods. But I try to keep it brief as I can here. So Freemasonry very early on, because it was coming out of England in 1717, by the time they had a parliamentary rule of the people, Freemasonry, as it spreads throughout Europe, Freemasonry is viewed by the Catholic Church and by rulers in Spain and Naples and everywhere else. They're looking at Freemasonry as an export of England, And they're very concerned about this idea coming out of England, this organization, this secret organization, these men meeting in secret, meeting at night, and they're wondering, what are they talking about? So throughout Europe, and Clement XII talks about this, rumors are starting to spread. What are these men talking about? They're not talking about, they're calling themselves Freemasons, but they're not talking about building anything. And so suspicion started to spread, and that became a great concern of the church, and rightly so, because we found out that there were some machinations going on in these lodges of Freemasons. They were plotting revolution and change. And what people in Europe, in England, and people who wanted to tear down the monarchy, they were using this network of secret organizations and secret meetings to start spreading gunpowder plots and things like this, because they wanted to tear down the monarchy. Why do they want to tear down the monarchy? For hundreds of years, anti-Catholicism was spreading throughout Europe. Everyone hated the Pope, right? For the most part, if you weren't a Catholic. So there's a lot of hostility towards the Pope in the Catholic Church. And there were a lot of people inveighing against the Catholic Church, trying to destroy it. And so what people realized was that the only way to get to the Catholic Church, the only way to take it down, was you have to get rid of the friend of the Catholic Church. And that was the monarchy. That was the king. That was the queen, whoever who was in charge. Because they would always run, because there was a strong relationship between the monarchies and the Catholic Church, because everyone's Catholic. The Pope, he crowns the king or whatever. There's some mutual benefit there. Napoleon, right? He's running to defend the Catholic Church against, hostile forces. It's that relationship. So the only way, so you can't get to the Catholic Church unless you tear down a monarchy. So that was the separation of church and state. That's why the revolutions of 1748 come along. Again, yes, I point out the fact that, you had Catholics on both sides. You had Freemasons on both sides of these revolutions. But this was a rumor being spread and initiated by people using a large system as a network to spread this plots against the church. So, so once the monarchy is gone, and they're able to institute some sort of rule, this new idea called the state, right? No one really had heard of this for ever, right? The state, right? And so this idea of the state was able to be used to attack the Catholic Church, right? So the monarchy is gone. Now there's the state, and then the states, wherever it's at, whether it's in Germany, whether it's in France, whether it's in Italy, it's now enabled to be used as an agency to attack the church. And that's what separation as church and states is all about. It's using the states as an agency to attack the church. And the popes have pointed out this before. The idea, Leo XIII talks about this, the idea that you can have a funeral that's not Catholic. You bury yourself in some funeral home. Freemasons, he gives credit to the Freemasons. The idea of public school, that you can be educated outside the Catholic Church, separation of church, that comes from separation of church and state. He points to the Freemasons for that. The idea that the state can decide who's married and who's not married, that comes from separation of church and states, right? The church had always been in charge of who's married, who's not married. The popes give credit to the Freemasons for that, because of this insertion of this weird idea of separation of church and state. I'll talk about more about this later when he brings up when Father Chris Alar tries to argue that America is some sort of Judeo-Christian country. I'll talk more about that then, but that is the major contribution to Freemasonry to the world. This weird idea of separation of church and state that the Catholic Church has never been on board with. The Catholic Church has never accepted the idea that we don't have moral authority to form and shape every aspect of society. There's no separation of church and state.
All right. To accomplish this goal, the first thing Freemasonry had to be is anti-Catholic. So the lodge, yes, it's true, has many sects whose groups don't always agree on things, and they're not necessarily even fraternal towards each other. There's a lot of different groups. You got the Scottish group, you've got the American group. So we're going to generalize here, and I know you're probably going to find one example in something by saying, Father, well, the group in Sri Lanka does not do that. Okay, I'm just generalizing here in a big picture sense. There's always exceptions, all right? So it's not applicable to all, but we're going to give you the majority of what is. Now, in the Scottish Freemasonry, really the 32nd degree, the 33rd is kind of honorary. But that 32nd degree says its goal is to rule the world, and it makes sense the Catholic Church has to go. Because you can't rewrite man's definition of the world if you've got God standing in the way. And how is God standing in the way? The Catholic Church. Now, in the Scottish Rite, in the 32nd degree, and this I got from Mark Miravalli at Franciscan University, who actually worked with Masons. One will thrust a lance into a skull wearing a papal crown, screaming imposter. It's anti-papacy. Stomping on a cross. It stands against the Catholic Church. Now, how has it stood against the Catholic Church, and why does the Catholic Church warn against Masonry? 3 reasons: syncretism, relativism, and indifference. The 3 things crushing our world today, and what I believe are because of Masonry.
All right, so lots to unpack there, as the cool kids say, and I'll do this as fast as I can. So, because I'll be able to mention it later. I know people who are not Freemasons, or who have never been Freemasons. They hear the word 32, 33, and in our society, we just think of numbers as numeric. The number 2 is greater than 1, right? 7 apples are more than 2 apples, right? 33 peanuts is more than 1 peanut, right? We think of a third grader is further along than the first grader. We just think like this in terms of matriculation, all right? That's not how Freemasonry works. That's not how Freemasonry works. So the Freemasons, in Freemasonry, properly Freemasonry is just 3 degrees. Enter Apprentice, Fellow Craft, Master Mason. That's Freemasonry. Freemasons, there's some inside baseball. You can argue a couple of things there. You can say, well, the Mark Master degree, or but Master Mason is the highest degree. The word itself implies it. You're a Master Mason, right? And that comes back from the guild system. In the guild system, once you become a Master Mason, there was no higher place to go. And that's why in the craft lodge, Master Mason is highest degree. Who's the highest officer in the craft lodge, in the Grand Lodge? It's the Grand Master. The Grand Master has the authority to allow any other so-called Masonic degrees into his jurisdiction, and he can kick them out according to his will. There's been times in history in the United States, not more than 100 years ago, when a Grand Master kicked out this really called the Ancient Accepted Scottish Rite, the 33 degree thing, kicked them out of his jurisdiction. There's been Grandmasters who kicked the Shriners out of their jurisdiction. And if you were a 33rd or 32nd or a Shriner, whatever, you were no longer that in that jurisdiction, because they were gone. So the Grandmaster is the most powerful person. He may be a 33rd, he may not. All right. So it's the myth of some sort of matriculation in Freemasonry. Freemasons consider all these other degrees, they consider them what's called moralite, right? It's not matriculation. There's no ranking in between different Masonic bodies. Let me explain Masonic bodies. The Ancient Acceptance Scottish Rite with the 33 degrees from 4 to 33. Some of them work all 33 from 1st to 33. That's a whole different inside baseball thing. But that's what's called a Masonic body. Okay. It's not Freemasonry. Has nothing necessarily to do with the guild system, but it's a Masonic body. The HSM, Scottish Rite, came along at a time. There was a time in society, especially in France, people were just making up degrees as they went along, right? There's all types of degrees floating around. I think in the 1800s, there were 25 degrees. The guy named, I think, Marion, he had a system. He created a system of 25 degrees. Eventually, some guys in one of the Carolinas, North Carolina, South Carolina, 13 or 12 gentlemen, they called themselves, created what's called the Ancient Accepted Scottish Rite. It primarily has 2 jurisdictions, a northern and a southern. Their degree systems, their 4 to 33, are a little bit different. When I was a 32nd, I was in the northern jurisdiction, so which meant my 13th degree had a different name than the guys who did in a southern jurisdiction, right? So there's some fluctuation, blah, 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 blah. But throughout the world, Australia, France, whatever, those guys are pretty much working the Southern jurisdiction, ancient acceptance, Scottish Rite degree system. Yeah, Albert Pike has some influence, but he's not as big as a deal as you think he was, that type of thing. So that's one Masonic body. But guess what? There's a whole different group of Masonic bodies. You have Royal Arch, Royal Select, Royal Arch Mariner, Mark Master, Knights Templar. You have, and I talk about this in my class, you have something called the Allied Masonic degrees, where there's like hundreds of other degrees, hundreds. People are still making up degrees. When I was a Freemason, this had to be back in the early 2000s. Some guys from Louisiana called me up, and asked me to travel down there they had resurrected the Rite of Memphis, and they were looking for particular type of people to initiate into their new thing. It's people outside of Freemasonry, they just hear that 33 degree thing, and they think a 33rd is like the highest ranking person in Freemasonry. No, he's the highest ranking person. He's one of the highest ranking people in that Masonic body. That's it. He has no authority over any other Masonic jurisdiction. So it's like this whole myth. So that's that. The myth of grades, and I think he says something about the Grand Lodge of London, right? No, it's the Grand Lodge of England. Minor point, but again, here we go. We're talking to a Catholic who's a Freemason, and we're saying we're throwing out things. We're talking about something about a Grand Lodge of London. Again, that's that distance. You said Grand Lodge of London, he's moving away because he knows it's called the Grand Lodge of England. That's an important point. There are certain things you just have to get right, or you lose these guys. And so that's why it's so important for Catholics just to stick with what the popes have taught. And Father Chris Alar, he had talked about, and these are the reasons why, the church teaches, he says something about indifferentism or something like that. No, here's the 4 reasons what the church is taught, what the popes have taught, why Catholics cannot be Freemasons. Okay, this is what the popes have taught. And this was from Pope Clement the 12th, his Enmity, the first paper bull ever written about this. The first reason, he said, Freemasonry is an error and a vice, danger, and a disturbance to the Catholic Church. Being as such, the Orthodox religion needs to be kept far from it, lest Freemasonry break into the household of God like thieves, like foxes seeking to destroy the vineyard. So that's number 1. Freemasonry is an error, danger, and vice, and a disturbance to the Catholic Church. Number 2, Freemasonry caters towards, relies on, or was established by the appearance of natural virtue, naturalism. Okay, Pope Leo XIII, he'll pick up on that, write a whole encyclical about naturalism and Freemasonry. Also, we could say this is indifferentism. Father Chris Alar does say that. Okay. Pope Clement XII says it obligates men on the oath of the Bible and a host of grievous punishments and silence them about what they do in secret together. So those are the 2 theological reasons why a Catholic cannot be a Freemason. Then there's the 2 political reasons. Being that I'll keep this short. Number 3, Freemasons meet in secret. Okay. And number 4, societies like these disturb the peace of the temporal state and the well-being of souls. So those are the only 4 reasons why the Catholic Church has ever taught why Catholics cannot be Freemasons. Anything else, you hear anything else, is just somebody's opinion. No pope has ever contradicted Clement on this, but Leo in Humana Generis, he did build upon it by writing a whole encyclical about Ism. Okay.
So let's look at our next slide. Here's the symbol, the Masonic symbol with the letter G. All right, the letter G. Now, many will argue this is very debated on what that G stands for. As basic as geometry, some say. As high as God, others say. Or most in the middle will say G stands for the great architect of the universe. All right, it's not a Christian God. Some will argue these, but one of the core requirements to becoming a Mason is belief in a God, small g, not the God. This belief is necessary to be received in the fraternity, so it's up to the individual, I think, what that G stands for, but it's problematic. Let's keep going. It is the false god of all deities and all religions. The G represents mixing them all together. It's like a bowl of soup. You got carrots and celery and noodles and potatoes and meat. You got everything in this. It's just a hodgepodge. That can't be true. You can't have thousands of different truths. All right? To them, all deities are equal. All religions are true. None are false. Again, this is relativism. Dangerous. This is really polytheism in a sense. And members are not even required to be monotheists.
And so I didn't even go back. I forgot to mention. So Father Chris Alar, he mentions this like very important thing that, again, you just never want to repeat ever in your life. As a Catholic and you're trying to evangelize a Freemason about what the Catholic Church teaches. This will just completely get you laughed at and, again, create that distance between you and a Freemason. So he mentioned something about he heard from some guy named Mark about some degree. He calls it 32nd degree. He heard from Mark. Mark, who's a theologian at Franciscan Steubenville, who has worked with Masons. So we're talking about hearsay, the worst type of hearsay. And we're getting our information from Freemasons, right? And so he says, well, Mark heard from some guy who used to be a Freemason that in a 32nd degree, Freemasons step on a tiara, papal tiara, and take a sword and stab it in the skull of the Pope or something and say, imposter. Now, granted, when I was a Freemason, I was in a northern jurisdiction. I don't know what they do in the southern jurisdiction necessarily, right? I've read, as a Freemason, I did read through, not in detail, but, I did look at their degree work, just to compare. I've never experienced any sort of stepping on sort of tiara crowd or stabbing anything in the head with a sword and saying imposter. Definitely not at 32nd degree. Maybe, in what's called the Kadash degrees, you have these degrees of chivalry, these knight degrees, where you maybe some things to do with crosses and religion and things like that. But I've never heard of this, and I don't know anyone who's ever heard of going through this. So it's kind of weird what Mark heard. So I'm very suspicious of it. We need Mark to provide some sort of reference. Where do we find this? Interesting fact is that in 1918, the Catholic Encyclopedia wrote in the encyclopedia that very thing, that Freemasons step on a papal tiara, and something about, and I think that was it. Yeah, I don't think there was anything about in the 1918 Catholic Encyclopedia, anything about a sword imposter. But so in an update, in an encyclopedia update that came out after 1918, that section was no longer there. So therefore, what happened? Did the writers of the encyclopedia realize that was some bad intel? Did the ancient Scepter Scottish Rite change the degree? No one really knows. But and I'm not here to say that you have all types of different versions of the ancient Scepter Scottish Rite degrees. You have the Ledroits, right? The male and female or Scottish Rites. So they could be doing something right? Also, sometimes you hear, oh, they worship in some sort of degree, they worship Lucifer, right? There's this reading that people, take from Albert Pike and things like that. Again, the not true, not true, and weird that people would still be getting information from a guy named Leo Taxil, right? Leo Taxil was a guy that came along at the time of Leo the 13th. Leo met Leo Taxil, which is, it's kind of hard to tell the story of Pope Leo the 13th without talking about Leo Taxil. It's a fascinating story. And again, I talk about it in my book, The Catholic Catechism on Freemasonry. Leo Taxil, I'll go through this real quick. Very interesting character. He started off this big hoax as a Freemason who was a big anti-Catholic. He was writing all these tracts and books against the Catholic Church. And Freemasons were just eating these books up. He was saying that the Pope sleeps with women, and he was just writing just the worst things about the Pope you've ever heard. You've ever heard. And Freemasons were just eating it up. And then 4 or 5 years later, Leo Taxil says that he's converted to Catholicism. And so he spends the next 7 or 8 years writing the most ridiculous things about his experience as a Freemason. And he's saying that Freemasons worship the devil and they call on Lucifer. They do all these orgies. He's and it's amazing when he came out with his confession about his hoax. Several years later, he wrote that he was just fascinated that Catholics believed everything he said about Freemasonry. He was just utterly fascinated. He said him and his team would come up with the most ridiculous stories to write about what Freemasons were doing with blood and devils and things like this. And his team of writers said, oh, they'll never go for this. But sure enough, everything he wrote, Catholics believe, because it's odd that we Catholics, we don't want to just stick with what the church teaches. We never want to just stick with the church teaches about why Freemasonry is antithetical to Catholicism. We always want to believe what's sexy. Sexy sells. Dr. Taylor Marshall wrote a whole book that's horrible about this subject. But again, sexy sells. I know why it's very popular. I know why people believe it, even though almost nothing in there is true, right? I get it. But it's like the hoax of Leo Taxil still continues today. Pope Leo the 13th, he met Leo Taxil, and he told Leo Taxil, I've read all the books you've written about Freemasonry, right? But Leo Taxil, Pope Leo the 13th himself in his youth was a Freemason. So was Cardinal Rapolia. They renounced Freemasonry. Everyone was a Freemason, when they were 17 years old back then. It's just something Freemasons were good about initiating kids into Freemasonry. So, but yeah, so this whole thing about the crown and tiara is just really weird. And it sounds like a little something that you would have heard from Leo Taxil. Now, Father Chris Alar, he mentions the Masonic symbol with the square and compass and the letter G. I talk about this in my class a lot. The square and compass, a lot of guilds, craft guilds, use that symbol. So it's not nothing the Grand Lodge of England made up, or the United Grand Lodge of England made up, right? It's just the import of the guild system. Okay. Next, the letter G. Father Chris Alar is saying, well, some people say it's this, some people say it's that. It's no mystery. You learn in the second degree, the fellowcraft degree, that the G is for geometry, one of the 7 liberal arts and sciences. G also alludes to the grand architect of the universe. That's it. That's problematic, obviously. The reference of God as a mere creator rather than Father, rather than omnipresent, omniscient, omnipotent, Trinity, right? As Catholics, we don't speak well of God by speaking of God merely by one thing that God has done to create, right? So we reject the idea of a grand architect, a universe that doesn't have a son, right? It's just, we reject that flatly. But there's no mystery in it. G is for Greek geometry and alludes to the grand architect universe.
We can never deny the name of Jesus for the sake of unity. We are to be united under Christ and only Christ. We can't put brotherhood and fellowship ahead of the truth. This is the misconception of the entire world today. This is why the church forbids Masonry. Masonic understanding of God is in conflict with Catholic faith and the Bible. You know that they believe that Satan is not real? I didn't know this, but only a force created by God. Yes, we know he was created by God, but we know he's more than a force. He's a fallen angel.
Again, we need a reference for this. I don't want Catholics going up to Freemasons saying, hey, you guys don't believe, you Freemasons don't believe in the devil. Again, just stick with what the Catholic Church teaches about why Catholics cannot be Freemason. It's indifferentism, it's naturalism. It's meeting in secret, it's the oaths, it's the moral law, it's the probity. Those four basic, two theological reasons, two political reasons. That's it. There's nothing in the first 3 degrees of Freemasonry that even mentions Satan. So that's weird. You may get something out of Albert Pike's Moral and Dogma, maybe something implied in the Scottish Rite degrees about Ariam and Orzammud, right? This battle between darkness and light, this whole thing. But no, we need some reference there.
What does St. Louis de Montfort give us? A 33-day consecration. Guess what? 33 levels of Masonry. 33 days of consecration. Each day of the consecration obliterate a level of Masonry that is false. I'm sitting there in the kitchen with Father Anthony going, whoa, that's huge. And it just occurred to me. Do the 33 days of St. Louis de Montfort, do this consecration, and obliterate the 33 levels of Satan that are trying to overtake, especially the highest. Some of the lower level ones, they're not even sure of what's happening. So that is our last slide. Now, Freemasonry began.
Let me pause it there before I lose that point. The idea that, again, there's no grades of Freemasonry, right? There's far more degrees than what you see in the Scottish Rite, the 33. There's hundreds of degrees. You have the Allied Masonic degrees. There's degrees that you can find in Australia that you can't find in New England. There's degrees you can find in Scotland and Ireland that you can't find in New Zealand. All right, so Masonic degrees is a much bigger thing than 33. So the whole obliterating 33 degrees through the consecration of St. Louis de Montfort is misleading. You're going to get rid of 33 degrees, but there's 666 more out there, right? So again, that's weird. And but again, Father Chris, he doesn't mean to mislead anyone, right? He did his research. He talked to some people, he talked to some theologians, he talked to some Freemasons, and this is what he came up with, and he's doing the best job he can. He really is. But then he says that Freemasons, he's talking about, let me just rewind it real quick before I lose the point.
They're not even sure of what's happening.
Oh yeah, this whole point about there's some sort of higher degrees, and these guys up here know stuff that these guys down here don't know. The first person that said that was Leo Taxil, right? That there's some sort of secret knowledge and there's these secret degrees that came directly from Leo Taxil.
1962. Listen to this. The Masonic P2 Lodge out of Italy released the following document in 1962. Listen to this. This is from the Masonic P2 Lodge. You don't think that they're anti-Catholic? Listen. Quote, get non-priests to give communion. Say that this is the age of the laity. Start giving communion in the hand like the Protestants instead of on the tongue. Collect some hosts for black masses. That is in a Masonic P2 Lodge release document of 1962.
So what's a P2 Lodge? It just sounds weird. Like P2, like I have to go to the bathroom. Yeah. Hey, I have to P2. Right? It just sounds weird. What's a P2 Lodge, right? Listen, basic rule here, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. It probably is. So the P2 Lodge, rightly called the Lodge of Propaganda, it's been around since I think about 1870 something, mid 1800s. Sorry, I don't have the exact date. Take my class; it's in there, or it's my book as well. So the Lodge of Propaganda is out of the Grand Orient of Italy, and it was a lodge whose members were supposedly kept secret, right? But now we have membership lists. So we know who every Catholic who belonged to the lodge, every Pope. Cardinal Bagnini, who created responsible for the Novus Ordo rite. He was a member of P2 Lodge, Lodge of Propaganda. And Lodge of Propaganda always had the most notable members of Italian and Argentinian society. Had your generals, your newspaper guys, your politicians. It was the who's who of Italy. Belonged to the Lodge of Propaganda, so-called P2 Lodge. Right. P2 Lodge is responsible for a lot of machinations throughout history. Right. The crash of the Vatican Bank. One assassination that we know about, right? Some of them. So it's a lot of bad guys in that lodge. And it's actually supposed to have been disbanded by the Grand Orient of Italy. All right. So a lot of history there. I'll talk about it in my book. But this document that Father Chris Alar proposes, that he posits was given to us by the P2 Lodge, it's just too good to be true, right? I mean, people died just getting their membership roster. People died getting their membership roster. Just in the early 1980s. People died getting their membership roster. But now we're supposed to believe that they published some sort of document. It's just too good to be true. And there's no reference to the source. You can find this document online supposedly by the P2 Lodge, but there's no original document whatsoever. It's sort of like that one document people proposed from Albert Pike. There's this document there's this letter, but supposedly that the Freemason Albert Pike wrote, that he prophesizes World War I, World War II, and World War III. World War III is going to be with Islam. Too good to be true, right? It's more a Leo Taxo. And there's just no source document. There's like no original letter. It just floats around. And so I think that's what this is. I wish it were true. That would be amazing. It could be true. We just need the original source documents rather than just some sort of stuff floating around the internet. But again, it's one of those things that us as Catholics we shouldn't be caught slipping, speaking to a Freemason, saying, hey, you can't be a Freemason because the P2 Lodge was going around spreading modernism. Just stick with what the Catholic Church, the popes have taught. Leo the 13th, Clement the 12th, Pius the 9th, Benedict the 14th, Pius the 10th. Those 5 guys who wrote explicitly about Freemasonry, just stick with what they said and you'll be okay.
It's working. In a recent Gallup poll, listen to what many Americans have said. They have adopted Masonic viewpoints on 8 moral issues. This is shocking. Birth control, 91% of Catholics agree with. Divorce, 73% of Catholics agree with. Heterosexual fornication, 69% of Catholics do not see a problem. Homosexuality, 63% of Catholics think is okay. Birth outside of wedlock, 62% of Catholics thinks it's okay. Doctor-assisted suicide, 57% of Catholics think is okay. Even pornography, 36% of Catholics think is okay. What? And polygamy, even polygamy, 17% of Catholics think is okay. Have we lost our minds? This is what's happening with this indoctrination.
So Father Chris mentions a lot of things that supposedly Catholics believe, right? I don't know. I never knew who signs up for these polls, right? But then he says that this is part of the Masonic philosophy. Again, he's using Freemasonry as an ideology rather than an organization.
Let's look at our next slide. Anybody know what this is? Father Gabe pointed this out, Our Lady of Good Success. Father Gabe pointed this out yesterday. You know, we must recognize, or we recognize, I guess you could say, most of these predictions have already been stated by Our Lady of Good Success in Ecuador in 1610. Mary said shortly after the middle of the 20th century, passions will erupt and there will be total corruption in the church, corruption of customs. And listen to this, Mary's words, for Satan will reign almost completely by the means of the Masonic sects. This is Mary. These are her words at the approved apparition of Our Lady of Good Success, saying that Satan will reign almost completely by the means of Masonry. I'm just giving you the truth. I'm just teaching you what Mary said, what the church says. So you heard me say before, if I disappear after this talk, I did not run away.
All right, that was good stuff right there from Father Chris Alar. That was some really good stuff. I like how he, I'll talk about this in my class as well. Nuestra Senora de Buen Suceso, Our Lady of Good Fortune. I don't know why people in North America have translated that into call her Our Lady of Good Success, right? Suceso is the better translation is not success, it's fortune. Our Lady of Good Fortune. So that's really all I have to say about that. Oh, but yeah, it's amazing. Our Lady of Good Fortune. So she prophesied this back in, I think, the 1500s, that Freemasonry would come along and do all these things that Freemasons did: separation of church and state, all this stuff, creating hostile environments for the Catholic Church. She prophesied this like 200 years, even before there was an organization, even before the Grand Lodge had come along, back when the craft guilds of stonemasons were just, Catholic guys and Anglican guys just building stuff. Our Blessed Mother, she came along and she prophesied exactly who the Freemasons would be. It's an amazing apparition of the Blessed Mother Mary. And, it doesn't belong to the body of work of the Catholic Church, right? We don't teach, you cannot be a Freemason, or a Freemason, you're excommunicated or something because of what Our Lady prophesied. No, we still stick to the dogma of the church, this infallible teaching against Freemasonry. But it is one of the most compelling pieces of evidence that Freemasonry is what the Pope said it would be, and how the whole thing was just prophetic, right? And just, I think Our Lady of Good Fortune, Nuestra Senora del Bueno Suceso, is the apparition of our time, and good for Father Chris Alar for bringing her into his presentation.
Wow. So what do us Catholics need to know? All right. The problem is, not all Catholics agree with this. They don't see any concern. They don't see Freemasonry as dangerous, even satanic, as a satanic cult founded to destroy Catholicism. They don't see it. That's because, why? Masonry likes to present itself as, quote, an ancient order dedicated to the brotherhood of man and the fatherhood of God. We believe in that. The brotherhood of man and the fatherhood of God. But notice how it gets warped. Let's look at our next slide. The basic unit of regular Freemasonry, or the blue it's called, or the craft, the Blue Lodge or the craft, has 3 degrees. 1 on your screen, entered apprentice. 2 is fellow craft. And 3 is master mason. Now I'll explain those in a minute. Initiation is the main business in a Masonic temple.
All right, just quick note again. Those degrees, it's apprentice, fellow craft, master mason, they come over from the guild system into this new Grand Lodge system from 1716, 1717. Entered apprentice, if you wanted to be a stonemason, or if you want to work with metals, you found a master to take you on as an apprentice. And this time in Europe, this was like a really regulated system. It became regulated. You can only be an entered apprentice usually in most places for about 7 years. For you to even be a master mason and to have apprentices, you had to have and have a guild. You had to have a warrant of operation. And so as an entered apprentice, you live with the master. The master, according to the law of many states in Europe, many cities rather in Europe, you had to provide food, shelter, clothing, and housing to your apprentices. They didn't earn any pay, but that's why it was regulated. That's why it was limited to like 7 years in most cities, because a lot of these master masons, they would keep their apprentices in this slave system basically for as long as they could without advancing them up to fellow craft. And so as an apprentice, what you want to do is become a fellow craft. So you learn a trade, and then what you do is you prove proficiency in your work to become a fellow craft, right? And then as a fellow craft, that's pretty much your highest you can go in the guild system, the second degree, so to speak, in a guild system, because from there, you became your own master. You had your own labor force. And but that was really regulated, because in a lot of these cities did not want too many masters. And that's why masters were very particular about bringing on new apprentices and advancing them to the fellow craft, because the more masters there are working, the less money, opportunity that you have to make money and provide for your family, less prestige that you have. So the masters used to work together to suppress the system, because they wanted to protect their trade, right? But that's how you prove your proficiency. You advance in your work. You learn how to use the working tools of the trade, and then you may eventually, your fellow craft. You may eventually, if you're really good, you may become a master mason yourself. But as a fellow craft, as an apprentice, you could not travel around and go anywhere for labor. But as a fellow craft, now you had traveling rights. You could travel throughout Europe and find labor. And so that's when the guild masons, they started to develop a network of lodges, and they developed signs and codes and ways to distinguish who was a legitimate fellow craft associated with a guild and who wasn't. So they had signs and handshakes and all this stuff long before 1717, 1716. They also so they had modes of recognition. And what else did they have? They had what they call lodges, where they would sleep and work on site. And so it was like this whole thing that they had. And like I said, they're very Catholic and very Anglican and very different types of Protestants. So everything that we see in Freemasonry today, where a person has to prove proficiency to become a fellow craft and then a master mason, that comes from the guild system, the name itself. All this stuff that we see in Freemasonry today comes from an old time. But what happened in 1723 with Anderson's Constitution, and Father Chris Alar, who mentioned it shortly, Anderson's Constitution in 1723, that was really the breaking point, right? All this innocent mirth and, these, what used to be a religious working organization of religious men working and laboring, became something much more nefarious in 1723 with Anderson's Constitution, where Anderson, who's a Protestant minister, he puts in that Constitution that he calls Freemasonry the universal religion, right? He says it's the true union of men, right? And he calls people's religion, whatever you were, he calls that a mere opinion, says you can't speak about that in the lodge. So it becomes this whole, so then around 1723, that's when we start to see this real Masonic philosophy start to come on, and it goes down this path that belongs to Satan.
At the Masonic Temple, members learn grips, signs, rituals. The American local lodges are mostly grouped in state grand lodges that are recognized by the Mother Lodge in London. This is how they're set up. Women are not normally members, but masters' wives can join the Order of the Eastern Star. Boy, that sounds really authentic, right? Their daughters can join Job's daughters, or the Order of the Rainbow for girls. African Americans are not traditionally admitted either. Instead, they're accepted into grand lodges for blacks called Prince Halls.
So here, Father Chris is talking about like the structure of Freemasonry. He has like a lot of outdated information, a couple of interesting points that he does make. So yeah, typically now you do have women Freemasons. They're quite prevalent in England. There's a lot of them. You also have lodges that are male and female. Now you're what's called, so you have two different groups. Largely, you have what's called regular and irregular, right? Regular, or people who call themselves regular, so to speak, or lodges that descend from the Grand Lodge of England, um, in Ireland and Scotland, the original Grand Lodges. They would call themselves regular. And if you don't descend from those Grand Lodge networks, you're irregular. But anyone can go start up a lodge. It's a thing. People just start one up, start initiating people. So you have this all over the world. But you have these two different groups, And the word clandestine, they still use the word clandestine in Cowan, right? The word clandestine in the guild system were these lodges of these workers who were not really recognized, right? They were these clandestine. They didn't have a warrant from a charter from the state to be a guild. And so Freemasons today still use that word. If you start up a lodge, you're not recognized, you're clandestine. Also, guild Masons had the word Cowan, eavesdroppers. And so guys who were not accepted as apprentices, they would hang around work sites and they would learn how to do the work of Masons, and they would pick that work up, and then they would find work themselves. They were called Cowans and eavesdroppers. They're trying to steal, right? And so that whole language is used still today amongst Freemasons about this whole inner war they have between who's regular and who's not, right? Your continental Freemasons from Europe, your Grand Orients, they're looked at different by the Anglo Freemasons from England and Scotland and Ireland. It's a whole inner baseball mess that's weird. So yeah, and so Freemasons have always been very interested in initiating, bring the whole family into the Masonic order. Bring the whole family, and that's why they really went after kids in the 1800s. It's kind of unique to the United States, this whole thing with the Eastern Stars, the female orders, and then the orders for kids, the Demolay, the Job's Daughters, the Rainbow Girls, that's kind of like, it's pretty American. You really don't find that much anywhere else. But yeah, he has some outdated information with the whole, he calls it Prince Halls. Like there's some black people hanging out in the halls. Right. Outdated information, right? Yeah, I think the history of this country we know is segregated. We used to say the most divided time of the day was on Sundays. Blacks went to their church, whites went to their church, right? Aside from that, the most divided time of the day is the Masonic Lodge, right? Up until I would say the 80s, the late 80s, yeah, lodges were largely still segregated. But since like the 1980s, they become more and more integrated. You see a lot of black men who are Freemasons who belong to predominantly white Grand Lodges. And you even see some so-called whites belonging to Prince Hall lodges. They're called Prince Hall because they're named after the progeny or founder, so to speak, of the lodges that were predominantly black. Prince Hall was an abolitionist, a black man free in the Boston area. Him and 14 other men were initiated in the Irish Lodge. And shortly thereafter, they were given a warrant from the Grand Lodge of England to operate, to bury their dead, to meet, and so to speak. Later on, they started their own Grand Lodge, a spread right alongside the Protestant church. Every influential black person who you could think of prior to 1970 was probably a Prince Hall Freemason. Pretty much everyone you can think of, probably aside from, Frederick Douglass and Martin Luther King Jr., right? Pretty much everyone else you can name was probably a Prince Hall Freemason. I myself, I belong to, I started off as a Prince Hall Freemason. That was where I progressed through, going all the way up to becoming the second highest appointed Grand Lodge officer. I was a district deputy over Western Ohio, but also I was the first Prince Hall Freemason to belong to a predominantly white lodge, dual membership. And that was the Ohio Lodge of Research. So I was a member of the lodge. I was a senior deacon in that lodge, which is the highest appointed officer. So, but that's been the case through that. And I think someone, I think Lucy says, how high of a degree did you get that, David? And again, the whole high degree thing is a myth, right? It's more linear. Once you're a master mason, it's just like more light. So it's not like a high, low type of thing necessarily throughout the things. But I would say, yeah, so obviously I was a master mason. In a Scottish rite, I was a sublime prince, which means I was a 32nd in that rite. In a royal arch, I was what's called a past high priest. I was once the highest officer. In the lodge, I was what's called a past master, which means I was once the highest officer in the lodge. In a royal select, I was in a royal select. I was that. In Knights Templar, I was in that. In the Eastern Star, I was the highest officer there for a male, which is a pass-worthy patron. I think that's it. Some other stuff that's not really recognized, within traditional Grand Lodge systems. But allied Masonic degrees, things like that. Blah 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 blah. All right, so that's the structure.
Now, the origins and history of this. It is the oldest fraternal organization in the world, the oldest and the largest secret society in the world. According to the Masonic Service Association, there are 1.2 million Freemasons in the United States, down from a high, though, of 5 million in 1958. So God is starting to make a difference in people's minds and hearts. It originated in the British Isles, right? And most of its members still live in English-speaking countries. But where did they come from? All right, look at our next slide. Freemasons formed from a group of stonemasons, like a guild, okay? During the Middle Ages, there were many stonemasons. And it was seen as an important occupation because they were building many buildings, even church cathedrals. So this is important. But in the Protestant Reformation, all of this stopped. Churches were not being built. So they allowed non-Masons, non-stonemasons in. Now, some claim that Freemasons will go back farther to the builders of Solomon's temple. Okay? Now, their focus is on somebody called Hiram Abif, the legendary and mythical builder of the Temple of Solomon. This is crazy. Other conspiracies connect Freemasons with the Illuminati or the Knights Templar, but there's little proof of that. But they're also associated with the New World Order and their conspiracy to run the world. We'll talk about that in a minute.
All right, filled in the blanks and corrected some of Father Chris Alar said here. But again, he's talking about the mythical origins of Freemasonry. The one thing I point out here is, he sort of glosses over the central mystery of Freemasonry in its sacramental system. In my book, the Catholic Catechism on Freemasonry, I talk about the degrees of Freemasonry as their version of the sacraments, because it's through the sacraments that the initiated receives what they need in life. It's a type of grace in a sense. They learn how to use the working tools and apply that to their life, right? This is the sacramental system. And it's all based upon self-determinism, right? So that the Freemasons aren't teaching, through Christ, God, and His grace, you can become this better man. No, it's through learning how to use the working tools and apply them to life that you become a better man. It's Pelagianism revisited. It's self-determinism. It's what Pope Leo XIII called humanism, right? Naturalism, rather. Just taking what's just naturally just your five senses, just making yourself a better person. Antithetical to what the Catholic Church is teaching. So, but he glosses over And like I said, I'm not beating Father Chris Alar up at all. I think he's doing his best. I think he's well-meaning. It's good effort. Okay. But he glosses over the central mystery of Freemasonry, which you have to hit if you're going to talk about this at all. The legend of Hiram Abiff. So the initiate starts off as an entered apprentice, proves his proficiency. He's passed to the degree of fellowcraft, proves his proficiency. Now he's going to be what is called raised to the degree of Master Mason. This is the final sacrament of Freemasonry. This is the climax of it all. This legend of Hiram Abiff. So Hiram Abiff, at the building King Solomon's temple, according to Masonic legend, there's King Solomon. He's like a type of grandmaster. There's Hiram, the king of Tyre, like a grand senior warden. Both are people you can find in the Bible. Both are evident present at the building of King Solomon's temple, which, according to scripture, was complete and finished. And then sort of like the grand junior warden, there's this character called Hiram Abiff. I like how Father Chris, doing like a Middle Eastern accent, he calls him Hiram Abiff. Right. Freemasons just say Hiram Abiff. Okay. So, so Hiram Abiff is this, and first let me say, I should preface by saying there's two versions of the legend of Hiram Abiff. There's one used by the Anglos, and there's one used by the Continentals. I'll share both of them with you real quick. So Hiram Abiff, after building King Solomon's temple, the plan is for him to share with all the fellow crafts the secrets of a master mason, right? So they can become masters themselves. That's the goal. So they can start doing work, right? So three of the fellow crafts, well, about 12 of them initially, become really impatient with Hiram Abiff. You know, when is he going to share with us the secrets of a master mason? These guys want to get paid, right? They want to start doing their own work. They want their own company. And so they come up with this plot to take from him the secrets of a master mason or take his life. 9 of these fellow crafts back off. You know, it's like, all right, you guys are going too far. We're not going to do that. But 3 of them proceed: Jubilo, Jubilah, and Jubilum, the 3 Jews. So one of these ruffians, so to speak, as Hiram Abiff, you know, he's doing his usual routine at lunchtime, going on a walk. He heads out towards the south gate. The first one meets him there, and he demands from him the secrets of a master mason. Hiram Abiff says, I cannot, I will not. The secrets of master mason can only be disclosed in the presence of 3. Myself, Hiram, king of Tyre, and King Solomon. So that fellow craft hits him across the neck, I think, with a level or something like that. Hiram Abiff escapes. He heads out towards the west gate, where another ruffian encounters him, demands from him the secrets of a master mason. So again, Hiram Abiff repeats, I cannot, I will not. The secrets of master mason can only be disclosed in the presence of 3. You'll get the secrets in due time. Just be patient. The answer is not good enough for this fellow craft. He hits him with some sort of instrument, I think a plum, right? Hiram Abiff escapes again, heads out towards the east gate, where he encounters his deadly foe, the last Jew, who demands from him the secrets of a master mason. Again, Hiram Abiff says, I cannot, I will not. They can only be disclosed in the presence of King Solomon, King of Hiram, king of Tyre, and myself. This isn't good enough for this ruffian either. And he inflicts upon Hiram Abiff a deadly blow upon his head, hitting him with a setting maul on his forehead, crashing him to the ground. He's dead. The 3 fellow crafts try to escape by boats out of the country, but they don't have the password to get out the country. So they hide the body. They mark his grave with a spray of acacia, and they hide. The next day comes, King Solomon is walking around the temple and no one's doing work. There's no plan on the trestle board. And so King Solomon's like, what's going on? Where's Hiram Abiff? No one knows. They start looking all around King Solomon's temple for him. Eventually, the 9 who planned to kill him confess of their evil plot. Now they go looking for the body of Hiram Abiff. They find it. Obviously, they find it. It has a sprig of acacia on it. It looks odd. They find it. Also, they find the ruffians who confess to their crime. King Solomon's there. And so this is the central mystery of the central sacraments of the Master Mason degree. Hiram's dead. Hiram Abiff is dead. The building can't be completed now. So according to Masonic legend, King Solomon's temple was never completed. And this is the work of the Master Mason, to finish the work that was never done. But that's just part of the story. King Solomon tries to raise Hiram Abiff from the dead. He grabs his hand by one grip, it slips. Grabs it by the fellow craft grip, it slips. He grabs him by what's called the lion's paw or lion's claw or something like that. And he tries to raise him up from nothing. I think I messed up the whole story. I think he tries to grab him again by the Master Mason grip and it slips, right? So he tries to raise him 3 times and it slips. Okay. All right. So the candidate is now there in the lodge floor, laying down in the place of Hiram Abiff. And so King Solomon says something like that. Well, the secrets of a Master Mason are now forever lost. And this is the Anglo version. This is where they depart. In the Anglo version, the secrets of a Master Mason are forever lost. So instead, we're going to now have a substitute of the secrets of a Master Mason, which in an Anglo rite turns out to be like the secret name of God. So the King Solomon reaches down to the candidate. And this is what they mean by he's raised to the degree of Master Mason, means he's brought back from the dead into life. And now he's taught how to wear his lambskin apron. The lambskin, don't miss the point here. The lambskin apron. And he gives him the new secret name of God, 3 syllables. Anglo version. Now, the continental version is different. The secrets of a Master Mason are actually buried deep into the ground, right? It has something to do with fair labor, right? Some sort of socialist principle, fair labor, your wages are, what's your due, whatever. But yeah, so Father Chris Alar, he glosses over that, but the legend of Hiram Abiff is the central mystery of, and it's upon that the whole system is sort of sustained, right? So that's that.
All right. Now, why not a new world order in regards to America? Well, many Grand Lodges are independent. They don't have a common agenda. They don't. The points of belief of the different lodges, they differ. This is how evil works. This is how evil works, not the church. The church has one unified position. These lodges all have different positions. As such, the term Masonic government, all the theologians I talked to said may be erroneous because there's no consensus among Freemasons about what an ideal government should even look like. I find that interesting. Now, most Freemasons, the younger or the lower levels, are unaware of hidden, secretive ruling bodies within their own organization. Many are not even aware of it. But what is common is a fascination with secret knowledge. This is the problem. You know what it's called? Gnosticism.
Yeah, good point there on Gnosticism. I think I already responded to the myth of the inner secret degrees and lower levels and higher levels that comes from Leo Taxil. He's the first person to say it. It doesn't make any sense. You don't even have to be a Freemason to go to Amazon. You probably missed it on Amazon Prime Day recently. Yeah, you could have went there, bought all the Masonic rituals. First degree, second degree, third degree, all the Scottish rites, Knights Templar, Royal Select. They're all there. There's nothing secret. It's always been the case. It's always been the case. All these Masonic degrees have always been public before Amazon. The first Masonic, exposés of the Masonic ritual was out before Pope Clement XII wrote his papal bull Inimity. So it's never been a secret organization. So yeah, it's just a myth.
All right. They even displayed the Bible during some of the rituals as a volume of the sacred law. So people will say, well, this is good. Well, they're about social establishment, not about the Word of God. Politics, professionals, military, finance, even the police have deep entrenched in Masonry. Now, American Masons come to hold power at all levels of government: the presidency, Congress, the Supreme Court. Over the years, this is why there has been a huge fight in the government against parochial Catholic schools and a demand of absolute separation of church and state, although it's not in the Constitution. Jefferson wrote it to a letter to the Danbury Baptists saying there needs to be a separation of church and state, but he didn't mean to protect the state from the church. He meant to protect the church from the state.
Yeah, this is a point. I already talked about this. The most enduring contribution of Freemasonry was, of separation in church of state. But back to the article that I posted over, that I have on 1 Peter 5, that essay there. It's interesting he brings up Jefferson, right, who was not a Freemason, but worked hand in hand with a guy named Lafayette, who's a French person, to write the Declaration of Independence, right? And Jefferson, he, people say, well, and Timothy Gordon, he's famous for saying this, right? And these people who want to talk about the Constitution being some sort of document with naturalism and Judeo-Christian principles, whatever that is. It sounds like a Kung Fu Christian, Judeo-Christian. But it's a myth, right? It's the Declaration of Independence, the first article, the First Amendment of the Constitution are demonstrably pieces of Masonic literature. Anyone who was alive back then and was familiar with the principles of Freemasonry, which were very common, because they were very well known. They were the movers, they were the shakers. Everyone knew what Masonic principles were back then. Anyone who read the Declaration of Independence, anyone who read the First Amendment of the Constitution, knew that these were key Masonic principles. These were Masonic documents. The idea of life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, I think that's the Bill of Rights, key Masonic. See, the thing is, the influencers in these Freemasons, you have to ask a person, this comes down to terms and definitions. What do you mean by that word, sir? What do you mean by that word? So when the Freemasons, when they were at that time, Lafayette and Jefferson, who's influenced by these principles, when they say the word freedom, they mean freedom from religion. That's what they mean. And the best piece of evidence is, sure, the Constitution, the First Amendment, was intended only for Congress, not the state, from establishing religion. Yet with Jefferson, what Father Alar misses was Jefferson in a lawsuit in I'm sorry, the draft for religious freedom that oh no, it was the it was it was in Virginia, and where is that at? So I can bring it up. Yeah, it was the Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom. It was drafted by Thomas Jefferson. And this bill was an attempt to provide religious freedom to the Jew, the Gentile, the Christian, the Mohammedan, the Hindu, and the infidel of every denomination, right? So the idea with Jefferson was to, yes, on a federal level, make sure that we have freedom from religion, but also to implement this in every state, right? To have this idea of indifferentism towards religion in every state. And we see where that got us today, a very atheistic, irreligious society. And we got that way because this key piece of the Masonic philosophy, indifferentism, was littered throughout our Masonic documents and throughout our states and in our judicial rulings out of the Supreme Court. So America was never a Christian nation, never. You know, people like to point to, they say, oh, well, look at in the Declaration of Independence, it talks about we all have the same creator. Creator? That's Freemasonry, grand architect, creator. The same, this idea that God is creator, architect, that's not the Christian God. It's not Trinity, right? And we know what Christian constitutions look like. There's many of them throughout the world that say Trinity, say Catholic Church. We know what a religious constitution looks like. We're not dumb or stupid. The American Constitution is never one and has never been amended to be one. For the last 300 years or whatever, we've had opportunities to make our Constitution a Christian document, but no, every turn we decided not to. It's funny that the first article of the Anderson's Constitution is a longer version of the First Amendment of 1789. The First Amendment of 1789 says Congress shall make no law respecting establishment of religion or prohibiting free exercise thereof. The first charge of the Freemasons says, in part, in ancient times, I'll start with, 'tis now more expedient to oblige Freemasons to the religion to which all men agree, leaving their particular opinions to themselves, whereby Masonry becomes a center of union and means of facilitating true friendship among persons who remain at a perpetual distance. That's nothing but freedom from religion. That's indifferentism. And that's the same thing that the First Amendment of the Constitution is saying. So, so that's that's further, evidence of the contributing, lasting, enduring legacy of Freemasonry.
Now let's look at our next slide. These are the handshakes. Oh man, probably going to get in trouble for this one. But I'm going to reveal to you, I was able to access and get from a former Mason the handshakes. There is a handshake for each degree: apprentice, fellowcraft, and master, that they use in their ceremonies. Now, many people will say, well, wait a minute, Father, the Old Testament references that they use and the Hebrew words, this must be Jewish. Okay, there is some Jewish influence, they believe, but the founders were Christian Scots, right? And its constitutions were written by a Protestant.
I responded to much of what he said. I'll just say this about handshakes. Again, just stick with what the Catholic Church teaches, right? Freemasons have a handshake for all of what, if you count the Allied Masonic degrees, you're talking about over 600 degrees or whatever. There's a handshake for everyone, all right? Some of them look like LeBron James, doing all types of weird things. That's not why a Catholic can be a Freemason. This is just more part of the sexy, right?
From the time Freemasonry penetrated Europe, the church has warned against it.
And it's funny that Father Chris Alar, he said that, oh, a Freemason sent this to me. You can go to Google right now. Just go to your Google or your DuckDuckGo, type in handshakes of Freemasons. That picture he showed up will pop up right there on your thing. Go to Amazon, like I said, go buy Duncan's Ritual Complete, right? All 3 degrees. You'll see the heads is so yeah, God bless Father Chris Alar. He's doing his best. And I think it's really cool that he just like discovered all this stuff and he's like really excited about it. And God bless him.
Now listen to this. Since the decree in Eminenti by Pope Clement VII in 1738, he warned against this. Catholics have been forbidden to join the Masons. Now, in 1983, there was a change and they kind of loosened the language, but it still holds. Used to be under the pain of excommunication. A stern prohibition with excommunication was included in the 1917 Code of Canon Law. Now, there's been a mistake in understanding because when the new Code of Canon Law came out in 1983, it did not mention Masonry by name. But guess what Cardinal Ratzinger did? Cardinal Ratzinger, with the approval of John Paul, made a statement as the head of the CDF, the Congregation of the Doctrine of the Faith, in November 1983. Let's read it. Our next slide. This is Ratzinger. The Church's negative position on Masonic associations therefore remains unaltered, since their principles have always been regarded as irreconcilable with the Church's doctrine, so membership remains forbidden. The faithful who enroll in Masonic associations are in a state of grave sin and may not receive Holy Communion. This was after they removed the word Mason from the Code of Canon Law 1983. Ratzinger jumped right on it. And he said, I need to clarify this. And says you can't be a Mason or you are in a state of grave sin. You can't receive Holy Communion. So the Church has condemned Freemasonry and the other secret societies at least 53 times since 1738. 53 times. As a priest, it is my duty, my obligation to teach this.
Yeah, I love how he ended that. It is his duty to teach the dogma. I love how Father Chris Alar said that. And I think that's the most important point, that to teach the dogma, not the sexy stuff, not the stuff that gets us off track, that doesn't help. Interesting information might be good for Jeopardy. Does not help at all when we're trying to evangelize a Freemason to come back home to the Catholic Church, or to instruct them that they're excommunicated because of their membership in Freemasonry. So yeah, it's the duty to teach the dogma, not the sexy stories.
The initiates, they subscribe to secret blood oaths that are contrary to Christian morals. The Masonic morality is very selective and very odd. Listen to this. In regulating a man's sex life, the Masonic oath says, I promise and swear that I will not violate the chastity of a Mason's wife, his mother, his sister, or daughter. That's it. Doesn't say anything about anybody else. Just about the family of another Mason. So one scholar told me, well, that presumably means all others are fair game to violate. That's kind of weird.
You know, Father Chris Alar, he's doing his best. And I think his scholars, these people he's talking to, are probably doing their best as well, right? None of these people read my book, The Catechism on Freemasonry. None of them took my course on a subject. The book has been out for 3 years now. Course has been out for about a half a year. Countless videos and essays. None of them dare come across. They come across me. It's so let's back up here. Again, this is a legacy of the guild system. Okay, so in the guild system, there were obligations that you took as an entered apprentice, as a fellow craft. And these obligations are going all the way back to like 700, 800 AD when the guilds were very Catholic. And in those obligations, we see that an entered apprentice, because he was living in the house of his master, he had his obligation that he would not have sex with a Master Mason's wife, his mother, his sister, or his daughter. Essentially, everyone in that house that was a female that was related to his master, he would not cross that line. So a lot of these parts, aside from largely all the blood and gore that we see at the end of these obligations now, you know, have my throat cut, have my body torn and twined and all this weird stuff. Aside from the weird stuff, all the other stuff we see going all the way back to like Regis manuscript and all the old ancient charges. These are just things that entered apprentice were. So it's nothing weird here. And I don't know who the scholar that Father Chris Alar spoke to, but again, it's like he's doing his best, but I mean, just try harder, right?
All right, now what about other things, Father, like Shriners? Let's go to our next slide. I want you to look at that symbol of the Shriners very close. What do you see in that symbol? It's the Islamic sword. It's the Islamic symbol of the crescent moon. So is it okay to support the Shriners? Okay, Catholic Answers, I'm going to borrow from them. They did a real good job on this. Some Masonic lodges may provide good service to the community, but a lot of times as a front to improve their image. Shriners take initiation rites. Yes, they do good work. They help children. But do you know they take initiation rites in mosques? Do you know that their oath is taken on the Quran and sworn to Allah? It's crazy. The Catholic Church is not formally pronounced.
And I'll just pause there for a minute. He's about to go and make some really good points about how, as Catholics, we should not be given material support to the Shriners, not going to their circuses, not riding in their little cars, not going to their hospitals when possible. So he's about to make a really good point about that. I'll just back up a little bit about the Shriners. In my class, if you take it, you'll find out more about their origin. It's really just started as just a fun organization. Somehow they got, permission to only have members of Freemasonry as their members, agreements that they made with the Grand Masters. And so You're predominantly, this is largely an American phenomenon, the Shriners. You're predominantly white Grand Lodges. Their Shriners are called Ancient Arabic Order of Nobles and the Mystic Shrine. Your Prince Hall Freemasons, they're called the Ancient Egyptian Order of Nobles and the Mystic Shrine. Your Prince Hall Freemasons, they run bars. Your primarily white Freemasons, they run hospitals. They wear fezzes, just debauchery, fun stuff or whatever they call fun. They do not meet or do anything in Islamic mosque. I don't know what Father Chris Alar is talking about. They have their own places that they call temples. They have Arabic names or Egyptian names, and the actual degree that they celebrate is actually some, I forget his name, but a guy, one of the founders, like two founders, he had a friend who was Middle Eastern, and his Middle Eastern friend invited him to some sort of wedding or something, and there was like this really fun thing that happened at the wedding that everybody was initiated into, right? It's sort of like the Order of the Turtles, and he was initiated into it. It was fun, and he went back a second time, and he actually took notes, and then he brought it back to America, and started up this organization called the Ancient Arabic Order of the Nobles of the Mystic Shrine. And so it's not even serious. It's weird. And it's what Freemasons call a playhouse. But the thing here, the important thing that Father Chris Alar notes is that these are Freemasons. To be a Shriner, you have to be a Freemason. It used to be the case in predominantly white Masonry that you had to be a 32nd. Now, I think most Grand Lodges is just a third degree. A Master Mason, you either had to be a 32nd or you had to be a Knights Templar. You had to go up one of the rights, York or Scottish. You had to complete your journey of one side. So that's the important point. They don't meet in a mosque. They meet in their own temples.
Made a formal pronouncement on financially supporting Shriner hospitals. They have not. One should never, though, give to a Masonic endeavor because it advances the anti-Catholic mission of the Masons. And therefore would be formal cooperation with an intrinsic moral evil and therefore a sin. Here one should consider the Church's teaching on the principle of double effect. One can never choose evil to do a good. And supporting anti-Catholicism is an evil. Now, is it necessary, you should ask yourself, to treat seriously disabled children in a given geographical area with no alternatives? Is there a good Catholic hospital in the area that can provide also care that you should also direct maybe your funds first? Okay, that's a good question. Now, the Church does say, however, if a Shriners Hospital is the only means of serving disabled children in the area, then it could be a good thing for a Catholic to give money, but only specifically to support the Shriners' care of children, not the bigger lodge and the mission of the bigger lodge. That makes sense? Very important.
Solid point. Ryan asked, David, how many everyday people in the U.S. are estimated to be a Mason? Same question for the average Catholic population. Thank you kindly for your work. I think of the 6 million Masons in the world or something like that. I think 2 million are in the United States. Prince Hall Freemasons, predominantly black sets. I think the rate maybe 750, 500,000. So we're talking about not even a noticeable percentage of the population of the United States. So it's never been, with Freemasonry though, it's never been a numbers game. Freemasons had never wanted to initiate everyone. That's never been the game. Of course, they had some huge influxes of membership after World War I and World War II. But those are largely anomalies. That had never been, Freemasons had never been. It's sort of funny because of World War I and World War II and the large influx, Freemasonry in the United States became this big superstructure with these huge temples and these big bills and this huge thing they had to maintain. So in the mid 1990s and going into the 2000s, they tried to compensate for the loss of members, people dying and not being initiated. They had a huge retention problem. I think as Sean notes below, yeah, they try to supplement that by having these Masonic degree festivals where they would advertise uniquely. You know, Freemasons had never really been into asking people to become a Mason. You had to be one, you had to ask one. And so they had to start having these large degree festivals, you know, become a third degree Mason over a weekend, right? And then they spread it out to all the York rites, go from third to Knights Templar in a weekend. Hasn't worked, right? Hasn't worked. The new generations just aren't interested in clubs or anything that the Freemasons have to offer. So the Freemasons have been in a position the last 20 years. They just having to restructure, ironically, like a lot of dioceses in the Catholic Church are starting to do, right? Rather than doing what they ought to do to attract people to the Catholic Church, which is tradition, which is attract young men into seminary, which is tradition, right? They've decided to just consolidate the gains and losses and merge churches and really manage decline and manage loss. So in a lot of dioceses, the Catholic Church and the Freemasons are doing the same thing. They're managing decline and managing loss. I don't have an answer for the Freemasons. When I was a Freemason, I didn't know how to. When I was a master of the lodge, I really just focused on reclamation, right? Trying to find old members to bring them back in. When I was a master, we were master lodge. We were near 2 college campuses, so we never had an initiation problem. We just had a retention problem, right? So, but the answer for the Catholic Church, again, larger number of the percentage of the population are Catholics in the United States, but our retention in the Novus Ordo Church is not any better than, I would say, the Freemasons. Right, the people they initiate don't come back. People who we sent through RCA and PSR, don't come back. So everyone's just managing decline instead of, as Catholics, holding fast to tradition and standards.
Okay, so these higher levels, the Shriners are the lower levels. These are doing some good work, but it's the higher levels where the problem becomes. All right, the status of any Freemason can be identified by his degree. So the Scottish Rite, as we said, has 33 degrees. Do you know that there are more than 160,000 members of the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry? 4,000 holding 33rd degree. So there's 4,000 that are 33rd degree. In all forms, the entered apprentice, remember we said the 3 levels. Let's go back to that. The entered apprentice, those degrees are just an introduction to the Masonic order. They learn about ritual, symbolism, and masonry. Then the next level, remember we said, is fellowcraft. In these degrees, they pursue a more advanced search for understanding. Now we're getting a little more dangerous. Philosophy, intellectual enlightenment, and wisdom. They say this degrees, or this second major category of degrees, represents manhood. You want to be a real man? Be a man of Jesus Christ. That's being a real man. The third degree of Master Mason, they said, represents maturity with advanced wisdom and knowledge. This is Gnosticism. This is the Garden of Adam and Eve. This is the danger. So Freemasonry is a religion.
Solid point. I guess, I responded to a lot of things he said already. I responded to the myth of grades and ranks. This myth that a 33rd has more authority over a third degree. It's just, I get it. I was going to say something. Oh, Sean says, David, why is there a Prince Hall Freemasonry? It sounds contrary to equality. Having a system to me is an Australian. And Sean, you missed me when I was in Australia back in 2002, 2003 or something like that. I did a tour as a Kellerman lecturer for the Australian New Zealand Masonic Research Council. Toured New Zealand, Australia, spoken a lot of Masonic research lodges about this very topic. Wrote a book called Inside Prince Hall. I think it's still on Google. Amazon. I think the publishing company is now out of print, but yeah, I wrote a whole book about that very thing called Inside Prince Hall. But America's had a whole racism thing, slavery, segregation, Jim Crow. So America grew up in two different Americas with this idea of a race construct, that people are not humans, they're races, right? So America is still just struggling with the race construct. A little bit different than what Australians struggle with the whole Aboriginal thing, or New Zealand struggle with the whole Maori thing and but it's similar in kind, that as the Aboriginals or the First Nation people, they're trying to make everyone else feel guilty about how they were not ever treated because they weren't born, and Aboriginal people feeling they should feel grieved about things they did not ever experience. The same thing happens in the United States, right? Black people wanting to feel grieved about things we didn't experience, never experienced racism slavery or Jim Crow. And white people being made to feel bad about black people never experiencing things that or white people feeling bad about things they never did. No white person in this country ever owned a slave, and in that sense. So the countries are similar in that sense, but historical issues are different. I think Australians treated Aboriginals like any colonial people would at that time. Horrible atrocities, but Australians just didn't enslave them, right? So if Australians had it, Australia would probably be a lot like United States, and you would have had two different Australias, so it's just just a historical thing, just kind of weird. So
Now, let's go back to the U.S. government. Do we have a Masonic republic? Okay, yes, there were Masons among the founding fathers, but a majority were not Mason. All right, insofar as the USA is founded on what? The natural law. We were founded on Judeo-Christian principles of the natural law. That's why the United States is worth fighting for and dying for. That is what we were founded on. It is founded on true and good principles. It doesn't matter if Freemasons have spoken approvingly of these things, and even there were some of them involved.
I already responded to
All right.
That idea that America was founded by America was never a Christian country. Never. There's nothing in our Constitution or founding documents that would even have you suggest such an outlandish thing. everything, but everything, there's more compelling evidence that America was built upon the key principles of Freemasonry. That's what the evidence has. If this is in a court of law, all evidence points to Freemasonry, not to Christianity. There's nothing on record that there's nothing in the Constitution speaks of Jesus or the Holy Trinity. Nothing, or even a denomination. Nothing. So it's I don't even know what a Judeo-Christian is. I don't even know what that word means. And I have a master's degree in theology. Maybe I'm stupid, but the Judeo and Christian are competing terms anyway. One religion believes that God has a son, the other one doesn't. What even is that? What is natural law? Where's that in it's just, anyone who says this, I think, is just dumb as a box of rocks. And I say that charitably, because they're being romantics and they want to believe this is a Christian country. But every piece of evidence we have on record says there's nothing about this country that is Christian. Yes, I think we can redeem, restore. I think we can pray. I think God can take a dead thing and bring it back alive. He can take a dirty thing and make it clean. I think that's the work. But come on. This country is, I don't even make this a political thing, but come on. Just look at who's in the White House right now. This devil and his whole party, straight from the pits of hell. And that's what this country produced. Joe Biden and the administration of this country is the fruit of what this country was founded to be: a land of Satan and devils. So we still have some work to do.
All right, so let's finish with Masonic symbols, because I get them all the time. Father, you have a Masonic floor of checkerboard, and I don't know if Brother Mark can zoom in on the cross, but we have the great seeing eye, the all-seeing eye. Father, I will never watch another Mass from the National Shrine of Divine Mercy, because you have the checkered Masonic floor and you have the great seeing eye. Let's talk about this.
So, go watch Father Chris Alar. He has a really cool response to yeah. So in his church, you see the crucifix had like the all-seeing eye inside of a triangle on it. And the floor of his church is it isn't even black and white. It's not even equal squares, like you see in some well-regulated Masonic lodges. But yeah, he has an interesting response. I think he really just sums it up by saying Freemasons don't own symbols. And I used to say this when I was a Freemason, that Freemasonry is a religion in a sense. I usually say, because when I was a Freemason, I was an agnostic. Sometimes I was a deist, right? So I didn't have anything to defend. I didn't have to go around and saying, oh, it's not Christianity, it's not a religion. No, I looked at it. It has a moral law, it has a deity, right? It has some sort of sacramental system. It has like just the basic elements of a religion. So it's nothing bad about saying it's a religion. When I was a Freemason, I didn't believe anything. But I get how Christians who are Freemasons say, oh, it's not a religion, because they have something to defend. I get it. But the same way with the signs and symbols, right? There's nothing new under the sun. I found that everything that Freemason, every symbol that he used is borrowed from something else, repurposed. Just like the swastika was repurposed by the Nazis. Everything, there's nothing new under the sun. But there are nefarious use of things. So what Father Chris Alar is saying, that their use of the all-seeing eye in the triangle is not nefarious, and it has a deeper roots in Christianity than it does in Freemasonry. And he says that the tile squares on his floor, he says they're green and white, not black and white. So he has a funny response there. So we're coming to the end of the video.
And so I want to finish, because a lot of people ask, Father, What if I've had Masons in my family? What do you do? Well, a good idea is to have masses said. Prayers of healing of the family tree. This is good. You can enroll them in a perpetual mass association. The Franciscans have them. You can find them online. We Marians have them, like the Association of Marian Helpers. We say masses daily. That'll help break those chains. You don't even have to tell them. You can just enroll them. It's beautiful. This is the need we have in our church. Doing things like the Association of Marian Helpers brings grace, breaks those chains.
All right, so that's the end of the video. My father, Chris Alar, of the Marian Helpers of Divine Mercy, I believe. If you're watching on the YouTube, just click in the subject line. You'll be taken straight to their channel, and you can watch the whole video yourself. And again, I just like to say that Father Chris Alar, I think he's well-meaning, well-intending. He didn't mean any harm. He did his research to the best of his ability. And but there was a lot of points of correction, and this video here is a instruction, a teaching on what not to repeat that Father Chris said, and what you can say that I think is helpful and that is within the body of what the popes have taught about the Catholic prohibition against Freemasonry. Again, visit me at davidlgray.info. Check out my book, The Catholic Catechism on Freemasonry. If you go to my website, I have a class just like it, 16 lectures, a bunch of hours. I think each lecture is like almost an hour, half hour. So, and or you can go over to Udemy, that's UDMY, and take the course there, right? So get educated, get informed, don't sound stupid. I think what Father Chris said was I think some good stuff there. What he did well versus say Dr. Taylor Marshall in that trash book called Infiltration, was that he used correct terms. He called it Freemasonry, not Freemasonic. Freemasonic is not even a real word. You go to any Masonic dictionary of Freemasonry, such as Mackey's, such as Coyle's. There's no word called Freemasonry, because there's Freemasonry, then there's the Masonic orders, the pendant, adopted, concordant. So there's Freemasonry, Masonic. You can't bring the two together, make a new word. That's not how words work all the time. Okay. So he did that well. The second thing Father Chris did extremely well, unlike Dr. Taylor Marshall in his trash book called Infiltration, was that he didn't say anything about the Carbonari and the Alta Vendetta. All right. Dr. Taylor Marshall, he hinged his whole book, the entire thesis of his book was that the Carbonari charcoal makers, which was a secret society in Italy at a time when Freemasonry was banned, 1800s. And later on, that also the Carbonari, one of their cells created a document called the Alta Vendetta, which was a blueprint about how to destroy the Catholic Church from within. His whole book hinges on calling them Freemasons and talking about some sort of philosophy called Freemasonry, none of which is true. The Alta Vendetta, the Carbonari were not Freemasons. Some of them were. A lot of them weren't. They were never affiliated with any sort of Grand Lodge. Their program to attack the Catholic Church from within is completely different from what Leo described the Masonic program to be, which is, again, an attack from without, separation of church and state, so you can use the state to attack the church. That's the Masonic program, according to Leo. The Carbonari attack the church from within is something that the communists copied later on. So, but his whole book hinges on that thing. So Father Chris Alar did a wonderful job not bringing in the Alta Vendetta or the Carbonari. God bless him for that. So I didn't have to go through that whole thing, and my head did not explode. So that was a wonderful thing Father Chris Alar did. So overall, if I were, if he were my student and I were to grade his presentation, I would definitely give him a D, right? Just no references, nothing sourced. There's nothing there. He didn't use this book, which is the most definitive source on the subject, right? It's like talking about the Bible and not using the Bible, right? So yeah, definitely a D, not a D plus or a D minus, just a solid D on it. All right. The reason why he doesn't get an F because he didn't bring in the Carbonari and he used the term Freemasonry. Sometimes he says Masons and Masonry, so it should be Freemasons and Freemasonry. But yeah, solid D across the board. He did bring in Our Lady of Good Fortune. So yeah, maybe a D plus for that. Heck, I might even give him a C minus because that was a great insertion. Okay, so I'm open to amending his grade to a C minus. Okay, but it's like a low C minus. It's almost a D plus. So that's where I'm at on that. But thanks for tuning in this super long video. I'm going to try to do my best to put some timestamps in here, so you can watch it easier and at your leisure. And I appreciate all you coming in, and including the Freemasons who came in, Sean and DJ Craig, and appreciate you guys coming in and your comments as well. And so yeah, God bless you all. See you next time. Blessings and shalom to you and to yours. I'd like to ask you to hop over to davidlgray.info, become a sponsor there if you like. Join my mailing list if you like. And visit the Gray Report while you're there for the latest news from a rigid Catholic lean.